The boardroom was ice cold, but I was sweating through my blouse. Carter Maddox, Gregory's nepotism project in a $700 jacket, had just declared in front of a dozen stakeholders that we didn't need to run federal compliance checks on the pilot program. He grinned as if he'd solved world hunger. I stared at the screen where he'd slapped his name on the proposal I spent 18 months quietly building. No acknowledgement, no footnote. Just Carter Maddox, Senior Innovation Lead in bold, as if ambition could overwrite authorship. Nobody else spoke, because no one else had spent the last 12 years learning how to speak without being heard. I was used to it. But when he leaned back and said, "I don't think we need to get legal involved. Feels like overkill," I opened my mouth before I could stop myself. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "You're proposing we bypass a clause that triggers federal audit review. That's not innovation. That's liability." His face flushed like a spoiled tomato. He snapped his laptop shut like he'd just been cyberbullied. The room exhaled, some silently thanking the universe it wasn't them. I didn't flinch. I'd survived 3 CFOs, 2 mergers, 1 corporate divorce, and a lawsuit settlement that used my strategy to get thrown out in arbitration. I wasn't scared of Carter, but I should have been afraid of the person sitting behind him, his father. Gregory Maddox had never liked that I didn't cower. I didn't defer. I didn't giggle at his jokes about emotional women in tech leadership, and I sure as hell didn't stroke his ego every time the company hit a new milestone. I just did my job, and did it so well that the board tolerated my silence. I didn't need to shout. The numbers did that for me. If you're still listening and this feels like something you've seen happen in your own office, maybe not Carter, but a Carter-like parasite floating up the chain, then do me one small favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of you listen without subscribing, and believe me, that simple click helps more than you know. Keeps these stories coming and reminds the team we're not shouting into the void. Back to it. The next day, I got the text. One line from Gregory at 11:13 p.m. "You're off the project until you apologize to my son in front of everyone. No punctuation. Like I was being demoted via blunt force trauma." I stared at it for a long time, not because I was shocked, but because I'd spent my entire career being prepared for exactly this moment. I knew, the second Carter walked in with his legacy MBA and zero respect, that this was going to happen. That one day I'd be told to shrink, smile, and say sorry for making a man feel incompetent in front of his reflection. So I typed my reply with no anger, no hesitation, just 2 letters. Okay. Then I sat at my kitchen table in silence and pulled out the dusty folder I'd kept at the back of my home filing cabinet for 5 years. It was thick, slightly warped from Ohio humidity, labeled in Sharpie, Schedule F, IP ownership. The clause was buried inside a contract writer nobody had ever bothered to read. Not legal, not HR, certainly not Carter. But I remembered every word of Clause 19.4b, because I was the one who requested it. See, 5 years ago during the Quantix merger, I renegotiated my employment agreement. Nobody paid attention. They were busy firing the old executive staff and celebrating me for stabilizing the post-merger transition. All I asked for, in writing, was 1 paragraph ensuring that any frameworks, innovations, or licensing language I developed without direct assignment stayed mine unless explicitly transferred. They added it. I countersigned. And then I went back to work, quietly structuring the most profitable licensing framework this company had ever seen. Now, the boy with his father's name was about to build a castle on top of my blueprints, and I was going to let him. At least for a little while. The morning they announced Carter's promotion, he walked in like the prodigal son who'd just returned from vanquishing spreadsheets in the wilds of Wharton. Hair slicked back like a car salesman in a Netflix docuseries. Loafers that had never touched concrete, and that over-loud laugh that made you want to close your browser and your soul at the same time. Senior Innovation Lead, the email said, like innovation could be airmailed in from a trust fund. I'd been working on the PRISM initiative for a year and a half. That project was my baby, built from the ground up, engineered to align with shifting federal grant protocols, with a risk matrix that had taken 6 late-night coffee binges and 2 weekends of me mumbling legalese in my sleep. It was meticulous. It was compliant. It was elegant. It was mine. Carter took one look at the 72-page foundational framework and said, Let's make this sexier. First thing he did? Stripped the budget line that tied internal testing to QA reporting, said it was slowing down velocity. Second thing? Moved the stakeholder sign-off process from legal to marketing, said legal killed the vibe. Third thing? Slapped his name on the executive summary I wrote, verbatim, and changed one phrase from regulatory mitigation strategy to creative workaround. I could have screamed. I could have reported it. I could have walked into Gregory's office and said, "Your son is about to violate 5 federal procurement guidelines and trigger a compliance freeze that'll kill our quarter." But I didn't. I documented, quietly, completely, without drama. Every change Carter made, I saved the original. Every compliance step he skipped, I noted the timestamp. When he forwarded my deck and removed my name, I exported the email headers and archived the metadata. It wasn't paranoia, it was foresight. I'd seen enough boys like him get bailed out by fathers like Gregory to know that HR wouldn't save me. HR would schedule a growth opportunity dialogue and offer him a catered lunch. But it wasn't just the theft that grated. It was the arrogance, the gall to walk in full of brunch confidence and think he could skate past every detail because someone else, me, had already poured the cement. He started booking thought leadership workshops instead of review sessions, replacing policy diagrams with vague pastel infographics that said things like bold synergy in Comic Sans. And when I asked why he'd deleted the contingency framework, he said, and I quote, "Contingencies imply fear. We lead with trust." I stared at him for a full 10 seconds and wondered what would happen if I screamed directly into a chair cushion. He treated me like a ghost, like someone who was supposed to smile, nod, and make coffee while he rewrote the future. During team calls, he'd say things like, "As I've developed over the last few weeks," about systems I'd spent months refining, and everyone just let him, because that's how it goes. You push back and suddenly you're difficult. You defend your work and you're territorial. You call out theft and you're emotional. So I let him build his little cardboard empire. Let him take credit for solutions he didn't understand, timelines he didn't verify, and compliance triggers he didn't even know existed, because I knew something he didn't. The agency we were submitting to, they didn't just scan proposals for buzzwords. They checked authorship logs, license ownership, and contribution trails. And Carter was pasting my name onto things I hadn't touched since I was removed from the project. My fingerprints were all over his paper trail, except I wasn't on the payroll anymore. So I waited. I let him cook. I watched him marinate in his own bravado, confident that the Emperor's new PowerPoint would carry him straight into legacy glory. I wasn't angry. I was patient. We were in Conference Room B, the one with the half-dead ficus and the busted thermostat that swung between sauna and morgue like it couldn't pick a side. Carter had summoned a handful of us for a final prep session before the Phase 3 strategy deck went to the board. He showed up 10 minutes late, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled like he was about to build a barn, not pitch a federally reviewed deliverable. He started breezing through slides, hitting all the buzzwords: innovation, agility, disrupt. Trust the process. It was like watching someone play Mad Libs with a TED Talk transcript. I kept quiet until he skipped slide 14. Slide 14 was the one that mattered. The risk matrix, the legally required audit log, the thing that proved we weren't improvising our way into a federal courtroom. "Carter," I said, keeping my tone level, "you removed the compliance gate." He blinked. It was redundant. Legal already greenlit the concept. I tapped the table once, hard. That wasn't a concept review. That was provisional. If you're submitting this framework without the updated regulatory trace, you're not just non-compliant. You're exposing us to audit flags. He leaned back like I'd insulted his cologne. "Look, we don't need to be so paranoid. This isn't your generation's procurement process. They want bold thinkers now." "I'm not being paranoid," I said evenly. "I'm telling you your timeline overlaps a funding clause that requires federal pre-clearance. You're flying blind through a minefield." Carter scoffed. Actually scoffed. "Jesus, you always do this. Act like you're the only person who's read a contract in their life." I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "No, I act like the person who wrote it." That landed. His lips curled like I'd thrown acid in his cereal. He slammed his laptop shut, muttered something about toxic energy, and stormed out like he'd been publicly pantsed. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. No one said a word. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately, as if folding time. That night, the text came. From Gregory. No greeting, no signature, just this. You're off the project until you apologize to my son in front of everyone. The absurdity of it made me laugh. I read it twice, 3 times. I was half expecting him to add a smiley face or a "let's keep it constructive" at the end. But there it was. Barefaced ego, cloaked in paternal outrage, dressed up as policy. He wanted a public humiliation, a performance, a little self-flagellation for the pride of his bloodline. I typed my response in lowercase. Okay, that was the moment. Not the yelling, not the dismissal, not even the stolen credit. That quiet reply was when I knew I was done. Not because I was defeated, but because I had just handed them the first shovel to their own grave. The next morning, I came in early. Earlier than usual, no small talk, no coffee run. I packed my desk in silence, putting each folder in a box I'd kept under the table for years. I didn't take much, just a couple of personal notebooks, the USB key with the unsubmitted white papers, and one envelope labeled in sharp black ink. Schedule F, Clause 19.4b. I left the resignation letter on Carter's desk. Not HR, not Gregory's. Carter's. 2 sentences. No emotion, no excuses. Effective immediately. Licensing ownership reverts to original author unless otherwise agreed. He wouldn't understand what it meant, not yet. But by the time he did, it would already be too late. Carter was already in the atrium when I walked in, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, telling someone on Bluetooth about how things were finally running smooth now that the old guards cleared out. His words bounced off the glass walls like a victory chant he hadn't earned. I didn't flinch, just walked past the security desk with my box and the envelope tucked neatly beneath my arm. The elevator doors hadn't even opened before he caught sight of me, grinning like the cat who just dry cleaned the canary. Well, well, he said, blocking the doorway to the hallway with a swagger only inherited wealth can teach. So, did you learn your lesson? I set the box down slowly, calm, measured. Sure, I said, looking him dead in the eyes. He laughed, loud enough for the front desk to hear. God, you're so sensitive. You don't hear you're wrong enough. That's your problem. You gotta let the ego go if you want to stay relevant in this place. I handed him the envelope. Thick cardstock, no return address. Just to whom it may concern on the front. He didn't even look at it, just tossed it on the nearest table and walked away, still grinning. I watched him disappear down the hallway like he'd just won something. As if stripping me from the project gave him full control of the keys I'd forged. As if all the systems and frameworks I'd designed were suddenly up for grabs, because someone with a last name thought they could wear my work like a costume. He never asked what I was taking with me. Most people don't. They assume if you don't scream or cry or set a trash can on fire, you've surrendered. That if you walk out with a smile instead of a file, they've won. Carter thought my silence meant retreat. That folder in my arms? He wouldn't have recognized its value if it hit him in the face. It had taken me 5 years to build what was inside. Not just the licensing terms, not just the rider clauses, but the quiet ownership trail that wove through every innovation I'd contributed since the Quantix merger. Every pivot chart, every system diagram, every proposal framework Carter had slapped his name on was laced with embedded IP logic I'd structured and logged myself. Clause 19.4b wasn't a bluff. It was a fuse, and all he had to do was light it. I walked back to my car, put the box in the trunk, sat in the front seat and looked at my hands for a long time. They weren't shaking, not even a little. Just still, like I'd finally stopped holding my breath. Back in the office, he was already rewriting the timeline, shifting deliverables, bragging in meetings about streamlined compliance, joking that I couldn't handle the pressure of real innovation. He started calling himself the architect of the PRISM initiative, changed my regulatory mitigation model to Carter's Clean Path. He even added his signature to the Phase 3 deck, digitally, and reposted it without updating the audit trail. He had no idea what he'd just signed, and no clue that the moment he submitted it to the agency, he'd walked straight into a licensing trap so airtight, not even Gregory's back-channel golf buddies could cut through it. I didn't need to slam a door on the way out. I just left the lights on, so they could see exactly what was missing. 5 years ago, Quantix had swallowed us whole in a merger that came with champagne, layoffs, and 2 months of hellish crosswalk meetings where buzzwords replaced actual decisions. While executives compared private jet loyalty programs and the junior staff hoarded office supplies like it was the end times, I did something quieter. I renegotiated. No parade, no drama. Just a short meeting with legal and one very sleepy HR rep who didn't realize they were about to sign off on their biggest oversight in company history. Tucked inside the standard contract renewal, buried between non-disclosures and retention bonuses, was Clause 194B. Just one sentence, drafted by me, reviewed by a friend from my old law school cohort, and slid into the rider with no red flags raised. It read, "All intellectual property originated, structured, or licensed under employee without direct assignment shall remain the property of employee unless explicitly transferred." No one questioned it. Because I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy. I was the ghost in the engine room, the woman who got results without demanding parades. They thought they were giving a loyal vet her little gold star. They didn't realize I'd just drawn a legal moat around every single deliverable I touched. And I didn't just touch them. I built them. The frameworks Carter had been parading around as his team's effort, mine. The language in the partner decks, the structural compliance outlines, the federal language translation that aligned our platform with agency expectations, mine. Even the formatting style, the pastel blues, the shaded boxes, the column width in the summary charts, had originated from my templates. They could mimic the aesthetics, but they couldn't touch the spine. And Carter? Oh, he was parading those bones like trophies. He submitted the federal Phase 3 proposal without my name on it, without my sign-off, without my employment in place, which meant, according to 19.4b, that he'd just deployed proprietary IP without a license. I didn't have to raise a fuss. I didn't tweet, didn't run to the board, didn't send some ominous email with bolded text and a lawsuit threat. All I did was wait. Because the moment that proposal left our server and entered the hands of the federal agency, it became a matter of legal record. And with it went a metadata chain that showed every contributor, every author, every revision signature. My name was in that chain. Not Carter's, not Gregory's, mine. I had timed the whole thing like a lunar eclipse. I resigned the day before submission, which meant the proposal, still bearing my systems, my language, my structure, was in direct violation of the licensing clause unless someone had obtained a transfer. And no one had, because no one read the rider. Not Gregory, not HR, not even Carter's frat buddy in legal who once told me I had a resting litigation face. The systems Carter was currently showing off in boardrooms were legally severed from the company the moment I handed in my resignation. But they didn't know that yet. Not fully. They were too busy celebrating. Too smug to check the fine print. Too arrogant to assume the woman who never raised her voice had laid down a fuse that slow burned through 5 years of arrogance. I could have warned them. I didn't. Let the timer tick. It was just past noon on Tuesday when my phone buzzed with a message from Mia, a junior analyst I'd mentored since her first week out of grad school. Smart, sharp, and too honest for corporate politics. She was one of the few people in that building who still cared about doing things the right way. Her message was short. "Hey, did you actually sign off on the Phase 3 proposal? Your name's all over it." My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at the screen like it was a confirmation I'd been waiting for, and it was. I replied, "Send me a screenshot." What came through next was a PDF excerpt from the official federal application Carter submitted on behalf of the company. The header bore the company's letterhead. The footer had the agency's submission stamp. And the body? The body was mine. Not inspired by mine, not adapted, not influenced. Mine. Verbatim. The layout, the language, the data justification strategy, line for line, it was the exact Phase 3 proposal I had finalized a month before leaving. The one I refused to let Carter touch because he kept trying to strip out the compliance logs. My name was still embedded in the author metadata on the document. My initials were coded in the XML layers of the version history. I had even left a proprietary hashtag in the structural framework, a little signature I used to track revisions across licensing transitions. I was no longer an employee when that deck was submitted, and Carter, in his rush to polish his dad's name with borrowed brilliance, hadn't just plagiarized me, he had publicly submitted stolen IP to a federal agency, under my name, without permission, without a license. That wasn't just internal theft. That was federal misrepresentation. I scrolled through the screenshots Mia sent, highlighted pages, metadata timestamps, red circled initials. She added a final message. I figured it was just a leftover template or something, but when I saw the Section G risk alignment phrasing, I knew it was yours. Only you write like that. She was right. I had spent 2 weeks refining that section to align with CFR Title 48, Federal Acquisition Regulations. It wasn't just technical, it was tailored. And now it was being used as if the architect had never existed. Gregory had greenlit it. Of course he had. He probably thought Carter was brilliant for getting it in under deadline. Probably toasted him at dinner, clinking glasses over foie gras and false pride. And Carter? He was probably still coasting on the high of hearing someone say, "Nice job," without understanding a single word of the thing he'd submitted. They didn't realize what they'd done. Yet. But someone would. Soon. Because Phase 3 applications weren't filed into a void. They were reviewed, verified, and checked for compliance, including IP usage and contributor verification. And when the agency's internal review flagged my name against the resignation timestamp, there would be questions, there would be delays, there would be consequences. I didn't need to send a cease and desist, didn't need to file a claim, didn't need to make a scene. The clock had already started ticking. I closed the messages, sat back in my chair, and stared out the window. $180 million was riding on that proposal, and I was the one person they forgot to pay. At precisely 8:01 a.m. on Wednesday, the boardroom monitor flickered to life. Carter was already standing at the head of the long table, chin up, chest out like a boxer about to enter the ring. The board had gathered for the big show, final deliverable review, Phase 3 proposal walkthrough, and what Carter smugly called his vision alignment session. The man had buzzwords for everything. Substance? Not so much. Gregory Maddox, CFO and crown polisher-in-chief, sat 2 seats down, already smiling like a proud dad watching his kid's first T-ball swing. Never mind that the ball was someone else's. Carter cleared his throat, clicked his remote, and said, "Let's begin." And that's when the screen froze, just for a second. A flicker. Then everything vanished. Not minimized, not corrupted. Gone. The deck, the roadmap, the charts, the timelines, everything Carter had depended on, every framework built off my IP and every projection drawn from my architecture, replaced by a single blinking system message: access denied, owner disconnected. At first, no one moved. Gregory looked like his jaw had dislocated. One board member leaned forward, squinting at the message like maybe if they read it harder, it would go away. Carter stood there frozen, remote in hand like someone had unplugged his soul. He clicked again and again. Still nothing. He turned to the tech liaison in the corner. "Hey, could you reboot the server or something?" The liaison shook his head. "Server's fine. This looks like a licensing lockout." Gregory snapped. "What the hell does that mean?" The liaison didn't answer. He was already typing furiously, checking admin logs, eyes widening the further he scrolled. Then he looked up, sweating, and said the words that made Carter's color drain faster than a cheap inkjet. "It's not a glitch. The system's core assets are tied to an IP license that was revoked at 7:59 a.m. All dependencies reverted to private ownership." Silence. Then someone near the window whispered, "Wait, wasn't that her clause? Clause 19? Gregory sat up straighter. "You said she had no claims. You said she walked away." Carter sputtered. "She did. She quit. She handed me her badge." The liaison tilted the monitor toward them, showing a time-stamped log. IP license. Expired. Assets associated with author ID RL grant reverted. Access blocked. 8R Zone 02. System audit triggered. Notification sent to Federal Proposal Review Entity. And just like that, the room turned from confused to terrified. Someone knocked over a water glass. One of the board members muttered, "You submitted her work without a transfer?" Carter stammered, It's just a presentation. It's not like we forged a patent. Another board member cut him off. This isn't a college term paper, Carter. You submitted a federal application. That's a legal document. Gregory finally spoke. Cold, measured. How much of this was hers? The liaison replied without hesitation. According to the logs, everything passed slide 3. And with that, the room detonated. Voices clashed, hands waved, chairs scraped back as panic set in. Phones came out. Legal was dialed. Someone cursed loud enough to echo. The whole polished veneer of boardroom bravado cracked in under 2 minutes. Carter just stood there, sweating through his expensive shirt, gripping a useless remote like it might turn back time. But the clock had already struck, and the owner was disconnected. The boardroom door slammed open so hard it ricocheted off the wall, making the glass tremble. Everyone turned at once. Legal had arrived. Not the usual polished delegation with color-coded binders and espresso breath. No. This was Elizabeth Chang, senior counsel, hair disheveled, blazer askew, holding a printout so thick it looked like she'd just yanked it off a subpoena printer mid-run. She wasn't even trying to hide her panic. She walked straight to Gregory, slapped the contract down in front of him, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Clause 19.4b, Greg. Did you authorize Carter to use her IP after she resigned? Gregory didn't answer. Elizabeth's fingers stabbed the page. This clause gives her full legal ownership of every deliverable she created that wasn't explicitly transferred. You knew about this. She negotiated it during the Quantix merger. Carter, red-faced and sweating, finally piped up, We thought it was just a formality. It's internal use. It's not like we tried to steal a patent or anything. Elizabeth turned to him with a snarl. It was submitted to a federal agency, Carter. That's not internal. That's interstate submission of unlicensed IP tied to a named individual no longer on staff. That's copyright infringement. That's fraud. And worse, you cannot recall the proposal. It's already in the federal review pipeline. Silence. No one moved. Gregory sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the printout like it was a lit stick of dynamite. Someone at the far end of the table cleared their throat. Quiet, almost afraid. Can we settle this? Fast track a license? Cut her in retroactively? Elizabeth shook her head. Not without her signature. And from what I can see, she submitted her own IP licensing forms to the agency before the company did. With timestamps. Another voice joined. One of the outside investors. Flat. Cold. You mean she submitted the same proposal? No, Elizabeth said. She submitted the proposal, the one that's legally hers. And that's when it hit them. The timelines, the authorship logs, the auto-notify triggers. They didn't just lose access to a presentation. They'd submitted someone else's work under false authorship on a federally reviewed deal valued at $180 million. The risk wasn't embarrassment. It was litigation. It was exposure. It was a full stop on every future agency bid tied to their platform. Gregory tried to speak, but his mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to breathe in a desert. Elizabeth finally broke the silence. We need to call her, now. But I wasn't picking up, not yet, because I'd seen this moment coming, and I knew exactly how long it would take for the panic to hit. I was already 2 cappuccinos into a quiet breakfast meeting when the emails started lighting up. Not frantic, not angry, just desperate. First from Gregory's assistant, then legal, then one of the board members I hadn't spoken to since the merger, who was suddenly very interested in reconnecting, each message more apologetic than the last. I didn't reply. Across from me sat Julian Crane, deputy director for the federal agency Carter had submitted the butchered proposal to. Unlike Carter, Julian actually read what crossed his desk. Unlike Carter, he noticed when 2 submissions, one corporate, one private, had identical structures but very different names on the licensing paperwork. He tapped the document gently. We'd prefer to go through your consulting firm. It'll expedite everything. Avoid potential audit trails. You've already filed the proper IP disclosures, and frankly, your version's cleaner. I just nodded. The paperwork had been filed at 7:42 a.m. the day I resigned, 18 minutes before Carter's submission hit the server. That wasn't an accident. It was insurance. Julian continued, "If you are open to resubmitting under your LLC, I can push for fast track approval. No red tape, just clean handoff." I smiled, soft and steady. "My firm's ready. Just send over the updated contacts." By noon, the resubmission was underway, with my name on the author line, my licensing terms in the footnotes, and my consulting rate in the contract. $400 an hour, minimum 40-hour engagement. Back at the company, Carter had been yanked from every single project. His calendar was cleared. His Slack access disappeared mid-lunch. I heard through the grapevine he tried to call in a favor with another exec, only to be told the board was reviewing ethical concerns and potential legal exposure. His LinkedIn activity spiked by 300% by sunset. Gregory? He was silent. Word was the board placed him on an executive oversight pause, which is HR speak for don't pack your desk yet, but maybe don't buy any bananas either. I got a call that evening from one of the external advisors. "We didn't realize the scope of what you'd built," he said. "You didn't ask," I replied. He cleared his throat. "We'd like to hire you, separately as a systems consultant, to help clean this up." I paused just long enough to make it sting. "At my new rate?" "Yes. Double for weekends." He didn't hesitate. "Understood. So now I get paid to rebuild what they broke trying to cut me out. I pick my clients, I license my frameworks, I bill in silence. And when I walk into rooms now, no one smirks. They ask questions. They listen. Funny thing about being underestimated for 12 years, it teaches you how to make the smallest clause in the stack do the loudest talking. And if Carter ever Googles clause 19.4b again, I hope he reads the footnote I added the morning I walked out. I license to whom I please.